All right.
Make it a quiet entrance.
All right. We're going to get started here tonight. Welcome to the Marquette Regional History Center and to the NEA Big Read. My name is Marty Atkinson. I'm the Adult Programming Coordinator for Peterway Public Library and also the NEA Big Read Organizer. And it's my pleasure and honor tonight to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Marty Reinhardt, who will be discussing the removal histories of Indigenous people from their original homelands. As the programming for the NEA Big Read draws to a close, which is crazy, next week for Peterway Public Library, I would like to share a few things that I've learned as its organizer and host. First, life is learning and learning is life. In the past 11 months of putting the NEA Big Read together, I've worked with so many passionate and talented individuals, from poets to librarians, environmental activists to scholars, and I've grown as an individual and citizen of the world because of this work. Marty Reinhardt is one of those individuals who met me early on in this process, and he's been instrumental in its success. Second, life is full of intended coincidences. Even when the programming for the NEA Big Read was finalized, it was never final. From the outset, because of the pandemic, I knew that scheduling speakers and events would be very fluid. But over time, I came to realize that the universe has a way of making things turn out exactly right. For instance, just a week ago, Marty was again instrumental in bringing Brandon Garlow and his wife, Fiona Bryn Ryan, to the library as keynote speakers for the NEA Big Read. They were not planned, it was just another intended coincidence of the universe working the way it is supposed to, since Brandon and Fiona were only in the area for a really short while. And the third thing is that life is about building bridges. Over and over throughout the process of planning and putting on the NEA Big Read, I've learned the importance of community. It's a theme that threads through Joy Harjo's An American Sunrise, this idea that we're all connected to this world, and it's our job to care for and respect each other and this planet. This idea is central to Joy Harjo's book and also to Marty Reinhardt's work as a scholar and educator. Marty is an Anishinaabe Ojibwe citizen of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians from Michigan. He's a tenured professor of Native American Studies at Northern Michigan University. He is the president of the Michigan Indian Educational Council and the lead singer and songwriter for the band, okay, I'm going to try it, Wa-Wa-Yeya.
Very good.
All right, which is The Circle. His current research focuses on revitalizing relationships between humans and indigenous plants and animals of the Great Lakes region. He's taught courses in American Indian education, tribal law, and government and sociology. He has a PhD in educational leadership from the Pennsylvania State University, where his doctoral research focused on Indian education and the law, with a special focus on treaty educational provisions. Marty serves as a panelist for the National Indian Education Study Technical Review Panel and as the primary investigator for the Decolonizing Diet Project. He has also served as chair of the American Association for Higher Education, American Indian, Alaska Native Caucus, and as an external advisor for the National Indian School Board Association. He also holds both a bachelor's and master's degree in sociology. And as I try to do for every one of these keynote addresses, I try to find a poem in An American Sunrise that I think is fitting for the subject matter of the keynote address. So I'm going to read you a poem by Joy Harjo that's titled Road. We stand first in our minds, and then we toddle from hand to furniture. Soon we are walking away from the house and lands of our ancestral creator gods to the circles of friends, of schooling, of work. making families and worlds of our own. We make our way through storm and sun. We walk side by side or against each other. The last road will be taken alone. There might be crowds calling for blood or a curtained window by the leaving bed. It is best to not be afraid. Lift your attention. For the appearance of the next road, it might be through a family of trees, a desert, or on rolling waves of sea. It's the ancient road the soul knows. We always remember it when we see it. It beckons at birth. It carries us home. Please join me in welcoming tonight's NEA Big Read speaker, a fellow Marty. We don't meet too many of those, and my friend, Dr. Marty Reinhardt.
Miigwech. Bonjour, wabrang meshe kiakia peshmetas, bawating no diba, ajajatin doram, nishnabe ojibwe na all. Kitchen maiden is big garden. Suppose I should put my glasses on if I'm going to read stuff, because I will not be able to see these words. I'm honored to speak here this evening as part of the Big Read program for Poet Laureate Joy Harjo's An American Sunrise. I want to thank and acknowledge the hard work that Marty and Katz put into this project, and to thank the other speakers for their important messages as they've shared their spirit energy with us over the last few months leading up to the event that will be happening next week on Monday, where my band, The Circle, will be opening for Joy Harjo. As I thought about how to open my presentation this evening in the title slide, it occurred to me that as Indigenous peoples, our identity is intertwined with the land and the peoples, including the plants and animals, that we share our homes with. That is homes with a capital H, by the way. When we were removed from our homes, it was a very sad time for us. Many wept uncontrollably from the immense feelings of loss and separation. Many still weep today as we watch the sunrise over Indian lands that are now called America. Thomas Dyer. This is a sociologist, American sociologist from back in the early 1900s. If people define situations as real, they are real in their consequences. Just a few words, but so meaningful. What are the consequences of our beliefs about removal and relocation of Indigenous peoples? Who is us? Who is them? Who is truly American? Who am I? Who are you? Who is red, white, and blue? Optish, Monty. This is a question I ask my classes at the beginning of each semester. It means, in Anishinaabe, where is here? The image on this slide was inspired by our traditional story of the Great Flood. As it so happens, this story took place right here. Monty. So, a long time ago, Nanabuju, one of the characters representing the human condition in Anishinaabe oral tradition. He was walking along and it started to rain, and then this great flood came and washed everything away. And then he was tossed about in the water and things were so turbulent. He clung to this big tree and climbed up on that tree. As it floated in the water, other peoples, animals, as we know them, began to come over and to climb up on that tree trunk with him. And as they floated around, they were all very concerned about what was going to happen to life. Their world had changed as they knew it. And so they continued to float around, and Nanabuju had an idea. Nanabuju told the other animals, I'm going to dive down to the bottom of the water, and I'm going to bring back up some earth to start a new world. And the other animals thought that was a pretty cool idea, right? Nanabuju's a cool dude. So they said, yeah, go for it. And so Nanabuju, he did. He dived down. And it was gone a long time. The other animals were very concerned. And seeing Nanabuju, they began to worry. And then Nanabuju reappeared. And he was just exhausted. And the animals, they pedaled the tree trunk over to where he was, and they pulled him up on there. He was like, I couldn't get down there, it's too far. Well, the other animals said, well, it's still a good idea, but we still need to try to do this. And so they, one by one, Makwa, big old bear, black bear, tried to do it. You'd think Makwa would be able to do it, just big old muscles. Couldn't do it. No. Otter tried to do it. Couldn't do it. McGizzy, eagle, right? Flies so high, flew way up, dove in, went way down, still couldn't do it. One by one, the animals tried and they couldn't do it. And then they pretty much gave up. They said, that's a great idea, but we just can't do it. And then one little voice said, I'll do it. Well, muskrat. And the animals just laughed. Yeah, muskrat can't do this. Makwa couldn't do it. Eagle couldn't do it. Nanabuju couldn't do it. Muskrat, yeah, whatever. So muskrat, dove in. Went all the way down, 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 and then started to fade. Bloop, bloop. Last air bubble coming out. Bloop. And reached out, passed on. His little body floated up to the top, and then some of the animals saw it. They paddled the tree trunk over, and Nanabuju reached in and picked up little Wajush muskrat, and he had passed on. They said, there were animals, they were just feeling bad, because they all made fun of Wajush, right? But Nanabuju said, look, his paw's clenched. And he opened his paw, and there's the earth. And so Nanabuju said, he did it. He did something that we all couldn't do. And so they said, what do we do now? And so Nanabuju said, well, we've got to use this to start the world anew, but we need a place to put it. And so Turtle said, put it on my back. Use my back. I'll let you do that. I'll carry it. I'll carry the weight of the world on my back. So Nanabuju did that, and the winds from the four directions began to blow. And as they did blow across that dirt, that soil, it began to grow on Turtle's back. And it became Turtle Island, a place that we call home with a capital H. That was a dramatic pause. Actually, this came up, I forgot what page it was on. Just think of this as a dramatic pause. So the first excerpt I want to read from American Sunrise is the story wheel. I leave you to your ceremony of grieving, which is also a celebration. Given when an honored, humble one leaves behind a trail of happiness in the dark of human tribulation. None of us is above the other in the story of forever. Though we follow that red road home, one behind another. There is a light breaking through the storm, and it is buffalo hunting weather. There can you see your mother. She is busy as she ever was. She holds up a new jingle dress for her youngest beloved daughter, and for her special son, a set of finely beaded gear. All for that welcome home dance, the most favorite of all, when everyone finds their way back together to dance, eat, and celebrate, and tell story after story of how they fought and played in the story wheel and how no one was ever really lost at all. The map on this slide is constantly being updated by Indigenous peoples worldwide. It's located at native-land.ca/. It's intended to give Indigenous people an opportunity to identify their traditional homelands in a shared online space. Many people now use this image when including land acknowledgments as part of their work. On page 34 of American Sunrise, there is a map, a series of maps that are there, here, and have always been there, here. They are transparent and layered, one on top of another, one generation over another. The lines of connection are relentlessly weaving, patterning rhythmically, mythically, and historically by image, sound, and sense. Each map is a being with a mouth and a tail. Even as it is a field of oceans or grass, they are making helixes of memory. Memory is always moving. The map on the previous slide stands in great contrast to the one on this slide. This one shows the colonial borders and names that have been applied to our Indigenous homelands. This is from the Geographic Guide to the World. Here's one I know you're familiar with. This map shows American Indian Reservation Areas and judicially established Indian land areas in the United States. You might know that there was a recent court case that recognized lands in Oklahoma as Indian country. That certainly made this map even more important for understanding the condition that we now face as Indigenous people. The map on this slide shows treaty areas and settled and unsettled land claims in Canada. So just because we cross a border between the United States and Canada, we have to remember that that border across our Indigenous peoples, nations. The Anishinaabe live on both sides of the border. We deal with both sets of foreign sovereigns. Some of you may have seen the maps located at this website here. Called Open Culture. Just watch as this map evolves. This is the states and territories of the United States of America. Mississippi, Michigan, Illinois, Louisiana, Missouri. See them becoming the states. Oregon country, Michigan territory, Missouri territory. See the line between the United States and Mexico, how it shifted? Sometimes we forget about that Treaty of Guadalupe, Hidalgo, and how it impacted Indigenous peoples from Mexico, when Mexico was still part of what we now think of as the United States. It's worth sitting here and watching how it developed, really getting an idea. What happened there? It turned green. Oh, the Confederacy. We're getting closer and closer to present day, where these United States of America are all going to create 50 stars on the flag. There we go. And then it starts over. And here's the other map. This is what happens when the United States evolves to what it is. I sit here and I look at this map quite often, and I think to myself, how did that happen? How did these areas ever become the United States and move away from this concept of Chique Minas, Turtle Island? Many are familiar with the American Progress painting by John Gast from the 1800s. This has become synonymous with the idea of manifest destiny. This idea that it was God's will that the United States become the United States. I was delighted to see the painting Reversing Manifest Destiny by Soke and Chippewa artist Charles Hilliard, which is now featured on the homepage of the Indian Land Tenure Foundation. Very cool, right? The map on this slide shows the treaty land cession areas in the area that's now known as the state of Michigan. So the big yellow area there, that is the Treaty of 1836, treaty-ceded territory. The light blue, right next to it to the left in the Upper Peninsula, that's the 1842 treaty-ceded territory. This is what happens after those treaties were made. The barely discernible areas shaded in red are the reservation areas established by treaty in the same area now known as Michigan. Lands ceded versus lands ceded. All right, I thought that was cool. It was very clever. I'm just going to read through these. Treaty with the Ottawa, etc. of 1836 in Article 13. The Indians stipulate for the right of hunting on the land ceded with the other usual privileges of occupancy until the land is required for settlement. Interesting wording. Treaty with the Chippewa, 1842. The Indians stipulate for the right of hunting on the ceded territory with the other usual privileges of occupancy until required to remove by the President of the United States, and that the laws of the United States shall be continued in force in respect to their trade and intercourse with the whites until otherwise ordered by Congress. By the way, that's not sex, I found out. Right. Back in the day, I laughed my butt off. I thought, oh my gosh, they talk about sex in the treaties. That's not sex. The place that I'm standing in right now is known as Marquette, Michigan. It exists within the boundaries of the 1842 treaty-ceded territory, very near the border of the Treaty of 1836 ceded territory. As such, many of the indigenous people of this area are citizens of tribes that were signatory to one of these treaties, or both. These tribal citizens have treaty rights that includes rights to hunt, gather, educate, hold ceremony, garden, among other rights. Here's a quick lesson about the interpretation of treaty terms. The United States Supreme Court has established its own rules for the interpretation of Indian treaties. They're called the canons of treaty construction, not the canons. There are three of them. One, ambiguities must be resolved in favor of Indians. In other words, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Right? That's funny, that's a joke. The meaning of the terms must be derived from an Indian understanding at the time that the treaties were written. And third, the meaning must be construed liberally in favor of Indians. Is there any ambiguity in these articles?
When was that?
What's that?
When was that decision?
Well, that was actually a number of decisions that led to the development of the canons of treaty construction. Mhm. Is there any ambiguity in these articles? What does it mean to have usual privileges of occupancy? Are you guys occupying right now? Right? So I would propose that the terms occupancy and settlement are two very major terms. And certainly we've had judges in the federal system and state systems who have seen these terms as having carrying great weight that allow for a certain interpretation of the rights of tribes and individual tribal citizens today. From a tribal perspective, I would propose that when we said, yes, we're going to agree to these terms, we as Anishinaabe, our leadership, it would have been an absurd notion for us to give away our country. To sign a document that says, okay, go ahead and take our country. We don't need it anymore. No country on earth would do this. That would be like someone going to France and saying, hey, do you give away France? Well, sure, I have the right to hunt. No, you wouldn't get that. So I think what our leadership, this is what I think, is that we said, yes, we know you have great power. In fact, our name for you is Chimokaman, long knife. We were coerced. That's one thing to consider. An agreement under coercion is not an agreement. But understanding that we were coerced, and we seen the writing on the wall, or on the paper as it were, I think our leadership had this brilliant idea. And they said, you know what? Go ahead and live with us here in Anishinaabe, a king. But live here as we would live here. Oh, and by the way, that area over there, that thing that you call reservation, that which has our food and our homes and our grave sites, that's not for you. That's for us. Those are reservations. So go ahead, share this country, but not this. This is for us only. Now, does that make sense? Does that make more sense for our leadership than saying, go ahead and take our country entirely and imprison us on reservations? To me, that makes a lot more sense. So one of the greatest repositories of indigenous understanding for these terms in these treaties exists in our indigenous languages. This is a map produced by the Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission, also known as GLIFLIC, regarding the traditional place names of this area. Names like Kiche Namebene Zibi, Guadalupe Neashe, Ishkikomane Neashe, Ozagi Okawa Biwani, Kichimitwanga Zibi, Anishinaabe Kichigame. Very important names. They tell us something about our relationship with Mother Earth, Mount Key, right here, right now. Kichenamebene Zibin, place of the Great Suckerfish River. This was the largest of the traditional villages in this area. You guys from the Historical Society, you know this map. We've been talking about this map for a long time. Hinsdale map. And the other image is the Jacques Lapitte's wigwam, located at Guadalupe, Neashe, or the modern-day Lighthouse Point in Marquette. The Hinsdale map shows the location of 6 of the Anishinaabe villages that existed here during the early days of colonization in the mid-1800s. there's only a few photos that really truly provide a glimpse of this era. And that's because, does anyone know when the first photo was taken and developed? Was it like 1863? 65, yeah. So there's not very many photos from this early period. It just sounds cool, right? Much of the daily life and activity of this area seems to have centered on Kiche Namebene Zibe. This may be due to the presence of an immense garden area that was located in this village. It may be due to the plentiful fish that were caught in the river, Kiche Namebene Zibe, the Great Suckerfish River. The one it's named after. The suckerfish is a revered fish by the Anishinaabe as a life-sustaining fish that provides much-needed nourishment to the people in the springtime after winters of sometimes very few foods being available in a northern winter. Or maybe it was the overland trail that connected this village with the villages along the shore, north shore of Lake Michigan, down in Escanaba, in that area. Or maybe it was the presence of a huge quartzite quarry dating back all the way to the Ice Age that provided sharp tools like arrowheads, spearheads, and knives for the Anishinaabe and our older indigenous relatives. Whatever the case may be, this village was the center of local Anishinaabe culture at the beginning of European colonization of this area. And is now relegated to the fading memory of historians and Anishinaabe oral tradition teachers. Go there now to this village site. What will you see? You'll see apartments. They're fairly new. They're nice. My friend lived there. A water treatment facility, not as new, not as nice. My friend did not live there. Bike trails, a dead body farm. I'm serious. NMU owns the dead body farm over there. And of course, a prison. I had an opportunity to view this area from Kichigome, Lake Superior, recently. I'll share a short video of my experience with you now. All that remains of our traditional villages are the descendants of the people who lived in them, along with artifacts that are kept in museums or hidden away by individuals, both native and non-native, for different reasons. Some hide them to keep them safe and living within an indigenous cultural context, whereas others hoard them like family heirlooms that will be worth big money someday. You think I'm kidding? Serious. I hope those of you hearing this presentation who have, for whatever reason, come to possess our indigenous cultural materials truly consider returning them to our people so that we can use them to learn from them in our efforts to revitalize our cultural traditions. These are ours. Do we have mute turned off? Okay, we're good.
I was invited out onto the schooner Inland Seas by my friend, Martha. Christy Phillips and myself and Vicki Dow were going to give presentations, talks really, about local native culture and our connection to the water. It was a beautiful day, overcast, slightly cold, but as you can see in the video, it was gorgeous. As we gathered on the shoreline to get ready to go onto the boat, they told us the rules we had to follow for our own safety and theirs. And then we all got on the boat and headed out. And we got out there and the wind increased. And the waves started crashing against the boat and the sails after we put them up, making a lot of noise. The gear was rattling. It's a little bit scary at times, but it was fun. So in my presentation, I explained some aspects of the Indian identity, idea of biological identity, cultural identity, legal and political identity. I explained what it had to do with what I was going to talk about next, and that was our treaty rights. I explained how we had treaties, hunting, fishing, gathering, food-related treaties, and education-related treaty rights. And all those had everything to do with our relationship to the water. Christy, she talked about relocation, her family history, and Vicki did a water ceremony to round things off. When we were out there, past the break wall, you look back on shore, I could just imagine our ancestors being there, Keynote, the traditional name of the largest village in the area, which is really at the mouth of what they call the Carp River. We call it Keynote, the place of the great suckerfish river. And you just imagine what our ancestors thought about this beautiful place. How they would be coming in off of the water, looking on shore and thinking of it as home with a capital H. As I was talking to the captain, he was telling me about how he got involved in maritime activities. I was checking out the wheel and the compass, and thinking about how similar they were to our medicine wheels. As we headed back into shore, I thought this was a really nice time to get together with folks and talk cross-culturally about our history, the local area, and our great respect for Chigume and Kichinamegnesidi. Oh, anyway.
It was a fun time. What happened to this area, Kichinamegnesidi, happened in other locations. Another Anishinaabe village that was forcibly removed was Sheboygan, now known as Burt Lake. According to the University of Michigan, all that remains in the ownership of the Sheboygan Band after the 1900 burnout is a half acre of a once 5-acre cemetery on the shoreline of Burt Lake. Currently, the former 411 acres of the Sheboygan Band ancestral village on Burt Lake is occupied by private cottage owners along the Burt Lake shore and by the Little Traverse Conservancy inland from the shore. Some of the band's ancestral agricultural land is now old-growth forest owned by the University of Michigan. In 1900, the land was illegally expropriated by a Sheboygan banker and real estate broker. As a result, the Sheboygan Band of the Ottawa and Chippewa Indians have been engaged in political and legal action to regain their ancestral homeland since October 16th of 1900. In 1903, the state of Michigan legislature passed a joint resolution awarding the Sheboygan Band 400 acres of land at their choosing in Sheboygan County. That has yet to take place. In 1984, the state of Michigan gave state recognition to the Sheboygan Burt Lake Band as a political unit, but not the federal government. Recently, in response to a request by John Petoskey and Professor Joseph Goen, the University of Michigan investigated and took actions regarding the decrease in the landmass of the cemetery. the unjust burnout of the native village by the Sheboygan County Sheriff Fred Ming and the land speculator John W. McGinn. The U of M President Mark Schissel assigned the President's Advisory Committee on University History to investigate the matter and make recommendations to acknowledge this history and to incorporate lessons learned into the biological station's education, research, and outreach missions. After careful review of historical documents, the committee determined that the Burt Lake Village burnout site is not university land. Rather, the site of the 1900 burnout is immediately west of what is now approximately 300-acre parcel of rare old-growth forest known as Colonial Point. This map shows the expanse of Anishinaabe-speaking communities that currently exist. We are a very large traditional tribal nation. Look at how far that stretches. I want you to look especially close at the outlying dots on that map. Way out there. Can you see? Way out in Montana, Kansas, Oklahoma. Those dots that exist furthest from the center of the cluster, these are some of the Anishinaabe that were forcibly removed and relocated. The Chippewa Cree Reservation in Montana was established by congressional statute on September 7, 1916, to provide the land for the Rocky Boys band of Chippewa Indians who had been forced out of the territory in Minnesota and at that point in time were landless. The Rocky Boys Indian Reservation is located in the Bears Paw Mountains in north central Montana. In the late 1830s, the United States removed some of the Ottawa to west of the Mississippi River, first to Iowa, then to Kansas. In 1867, they were moved again to the Indian Territory in what would become northeast Oklahoma. Can you see Ottawa down there in that little cutout? Is that itty bitty piece of land there? Everybody see it? Yeah, and that's over here. Under the Indian Removal Act, the Prairie Band of Potawatomi were forcibly relocated west, first to the Missouri Platte County in the mid-1830s, then to the vicinity of Council Bluffs, Iowa in the 1840s, where they were known as the Bluff Indians. The tribe controlled up to 5 million acres at both locations. After 1846, the tribe was moved to present-day Kansas. At that time, the reservation was 33 square miles, which included part of present-day Topeka. During the period from the 1840s to the 1860s, 1940s to 1960s, my apologies, in which the Indian termination policy was enforced, 4 Kansas tribes, including the Potawatomi, were targeted for termination. And they were ultimately able to avoid termination, thank goodness. No doubt everyone is familiar with the Trail of Tears. This map shows the locations of the indigenous peoples who were removed and relocated as a result of the Indian Relocation Act of 1830 under President Jackson, who was also known as Indian Killer. Can we get that guy off the $20 bill now, please? Please. The General Allotment Act of 1887, also called the Dawes Act, where over 60 million acres were either ceded outright or sold to the government for non-Indian homesteaders and corporations as surplus land. Look at that advertisement, Indian land for sale. Get a home of your own. Perfect title. Right? According to the Indian Land Tenure Foundation, this act authorized the president at that time, Grover Cleveland, to survey Indian tribal land and divide the area into allotments for individual Indians and families. The act was named for Senator Henry Dawes of Massachusetts, the act's lead proponent. It was applied to reservations whenever, in the president's opinion, it was advantageous for particular Indian nations. Members of the selected tribe or reservation were either given permission to select pieces of land, usually around 40 to 160 acres in size, for themselves and their children, or the tracts were assigned by the agency superintendent. If the amount of reservation land exceeded the amount needed for allotment, the federal government could negotiate the purchase of the land from the tribes and sell it to non-Indian settlers. As you can probably guess, the money paid to the tribes was pennies on the dollar. Checkerboarding and fractionalization. As a result of the allotment processes and continuous encroachment on Indian lands, we now have many reservations that are checkerboarded with non-Indian people and entities occupying space that was supposed to be reserved for Indian tribes. Remember earlier I said the reservations were reserved for Indian people? In some cases, individual Indian people have allotments that have now been subdivided down through subsequent generations, where the parcels are now 5 foot by 5 foot and landlocked. Well, what do you do with that? I suppose you could put a flower arrangement out there by helicopter. The advent of casino gaming has helped some tribes buy back their land, but often the process is lengthy and pricey. When non-Indian people know that tribes are trying to rebuy their land, they jack the price up. That's a fact. It's happening right now here in the UP over by Lac Vieux Desert. Lac Vieux Desert is really doing well buying land back near Watersmeet. But you know those people near the reservation are jacking the price up. Opportunity knocks. The Indian Land Tenure Foundation is working with tribes and tribal citizens to address these types of issues, like consolidating former allotments so that they're actually usable for collectives. The image on the left side of this slide shows the land of the Fort Berthold Reservation before construction of the Garrison Dam. The one on the bottom right is during its construction. The one on the upper right is a picture that depicts George Gillette crying during the signing of the contract on May 20th, 1948, which was authorized by Public Law 296, which was enacted by Congress in 1947, which was signed by the President of the United States in 1949. Gillette said, "We will sign this contract with a heavy heart. With a few scratches of the pen, we will sell the best part of our reservation. Right now, the future doesn't look too good to us." On this day in 1949, the U.S. government took 152,360 acres from the Indian reservation in North Dakota to use for support construction of the Garrison Dam. It flooded approximately a quarter of the reservation land, 94% of their agricultural land, to create the Lake Sakakawea. Because of the lake-associated flooding, the seat of the reservation offices also had to be moved to Newtown, and 1,700 residents had to be relocated. The government paid $33.47 per acre for the land. Along with this, the tribe was denied the right to use the reservoir shoreline for grazing, hunting, fishing, or other purposes, including irrigation, development, and royalty rights on all subsurface materials within the reservoir area. So there's removal from land, and then there's removal from land. This is the kind of removal that happens through education. There were 8 Indian day schools under the supervision of the Mackinac Agency in the late 1800s in the state of Michigan. The Garden Indian Day School, Nabatong, Longwood, Chippewa, Nipissing, Hannahville, Lotz, Sugar Island. Indian education was another way that indigenous people were removed from their lands and cultures. Here in Michigan, there were multiple ways this was approached. One was the day schools. As you can see in the image of a book that was used at the Sugar Island School, the curriculum was extremely biased against indigenous ways of life. Can you guys see that? It says in the book, this book was actually used for the students, Indian students there. By Columbus, in the year, it says, by whom was America discovered? By Columbus, it says, in the year 1492. What kind of people did he find here? Answer, dark-colored savages. Dark-colored savages. This is what they were teaching our little kids at this Indian school. We were dark-colored savages. What did Columbus call them? Indians. By far the worst era of Indian education was the boarding school era. First federal Indian boarding school was Carlisle Indian Boarding School in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. This was championed by Pratt, a retired Army officer whose motto was kill the Indian and save the man. This was the most disruptive era of Indian education due to forced assimilation and conversion, breaking our ties with Mother Earth and our cultural ways. Spirit sickness resulted in the worst conditions ever in Indian country and the lowest population count of Indians in the United States. In 1900, when there were less than 275,000 of us living. Less than 275,000 Indian people in 1900. That was the nadir of our existence, not the Ralph Nader, by the way. The nadir of our existence, right? We were not allowed to speak our native languages. We were dressed in military style, regimented, marched to and from one activity to another, just like we were in the army, given new European white names. White names. Not our names like I introduced myself earlier. Well, they known me Sheikh Yupka. Instead, we were given Tom and John and David and Shirley and Penelope. The outing system brought child labor to farmers and businesses, sometimes without compensation, often without compensation. Extremely harsh discipline, isolation chambers, whipping, rampant illness and death, runaways, rampant suicides. There are now 7,310 unmarked graves that they have found at these schools and the schools in Canada, and the number continues to climb. One of the oldest church-run Indian schools in Michigan was the Holy Childhood of Jesus School, and it was anything but holy. I know. My mother and her cousins and brothers attended there, and it was atrocities upon atrocities. Rapes, beatings, malnutrition, forced child labor at the hand of the Catholic Church. It was both a day school and a boarding school, which opened in 1829, closed in 1839, reopened in 1884, and closed in 1983. It was run by the School Sisters of Notre Dame, who began serving the school in 1886. It was used as a day school and a daycare center and a thrift shop since it was closed. The other picture there on the right is the federally operated Mount Pleasant Indian Boarding School that was opened in 1891 and remained in operation until 1934. Located on the same properties that had been reserved as a mission site by the treaties of 1855 and 1864. There were approximately 350 to 375 students there from 1920 to the spring of 1933. There were about 60 orphans who remained in residence and began attending Mount Pleasant Public Schools while the foster care placements were being arranged for them, primarily in European American homes when they closed the school. Termination of the federal relationship with Indian tribes. More than 100 tribes went through this process. Not only did the federal government misuse and abuse and neglect Indian tribes, then they saw fit to dismantle the relationship and wash their hands of it. Millions of acres were lost due to tax forfeitures afterward. Millions of acres, because the federal government said, okay, we're done with the Indian problem, we'll give it to the states now. Another period of removal. Public Law 280 states, California, Minnesota, Nebraska, Oregon, Wisconsin, also eliminated most federal Indian country criminal jurisdiction. This authorized state criminal jurisdiction, which had broader scope than the previous federal jurisdiction. It opened up state civil courts to suits against Indians. So again, people losing their connection with the land because states were biased against Indians, the way they applied the laws, or didn't. Urban Indian centers were opened during this time. They were promoted by the Department of the Interior, the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Each state has at least one urban Indian center, and some have more. World War II and the Korean War, along with pressures from termination and relocation laws, all influenced many people to move to big cities in search of employment. According to the State Historical Society of North Dakota, it's been estimated that nearly 750,000 American Indian people were relocated between 1952 and 1980 to urban centers. That's a lot of people. Apish Jichuk. Apish Jichuk. I want to close with another question that I ask my students at the beginning of every semester. Apish Jichuk. Where is the center? Where is the center? This is vital to our understanding of health and identity of place. We must reconnect with Mother Earth in a deep and spiritual way. Some of the efforts that are being done include our work on the Decolonizing Diet Project. Hey, Nancy? Where a group of us committed to eating indigenous foods from the Great Lakes region on a daily basis for 1 year to see what would happen to us on a biological, social, and legal political level. I can tell you, as Nancy could, it was an amazing experience and had great significant outcomes. The revitalization efforts that are springing up in communities across Turtle Island, like the Land Back movement, will help recenter our identities and heal the spirit sickness that plagues all of us, indigenous or non-indigenous. We are starting to see cities and organizations find new and creative ways to get control of land back in the hands of indigenous peoples and their tribes. For instance, we're currently working with the Upper Peninsula Land Conservancy on ways to get local tribes and their citizens access to multiple parcels of land located in or near Kitchen. The image on this slide is a medicine wheel, which represents Minobimada's, the good life. This is a primary teaching tool for the Anishinaabe. It provides us with a way to understand life, whether it's the history of how we once lived on Mother Earth, or how we were removed and relocated, or how we think about present day relations and how our actions today might impact 7 generations into the future. Miigwech. Thank you. Do we have time for questions, Marty?
I think we can answer a couple questions.
Great.
Does anybody have any questions or comments?
As there was talk of legislation regarding land. I don't know, and it would be curious regarding legislation and, kind of reunification of spirits and the descendants and all that of the boarding school and the consequences of that.
Yeah, as far as like reparations for boarding school attendees, is that
Yeah, and just kind of, yeah.
Yeah, so we were having this interesting pre-event conversation this evening about the atrocities of boarding schools and how they were like a nuclear bomb going off in the middle of, complete devastation and global climate change. I mean, put all that together, that's the impact it had on Indian country. It really knocked the heck out of the wind out of our sails. For the Catholic Church, which, by the way, is treated as a sovereign entity by other countries. The church is considered a sovereign nation. Think about that. The wealth of the Catholic Church in its modern day context was created primarily by the wealth that they took from these lands. That has sustained the church to be as wealthy as it is today. So when the Pope is coming back over, there's a lot of fanfare about the Pope coming to make an apology to the First Nations in Canada. And, I get it. It's a cool thing. He's a cool dude. I think he and I might hang out, sit by the fire and talk, But there has to be more substance to it. Because an apology without accountability is very empty. There has to be just compensation. And I'm sorry, just compensation cannot come just in the form of money. $33 million paid to the Pope's own clerics to go further proselytize and missionize indigenous people throughout the world. I'm sorry, that doesn't cut it. It has to be land back. The land that took us how many thousands of years to live in balance, the land that will have to be back in our control so that we have a high quality relationship, spiritual relationship with Mother Earth and her other inhabitants. So yes, I applaud those kind of efforts. Some might say they're pie in the sky because who's going to give land back?
And then I also have a comment. My grandma's theory on why the nuns and such were so mean was because they didn't get any sex.
Well, I think it's kind of funny. I mean, in some ways it's kind of funny, right? But they actually did get sex.
I'm sure it was like a funeral joke.
Yeah.
And her funeral.
The unfortunate part of it is they preyed on the children. That's the real sad part, right?
Double mean. Yeah.
Thank you. Other questions? Move from over here. Go ahead.
So throughout your presentation, you talked about like loss of land, loss of other indigenous people through boarding school, through relocations and stuff. Do you think the resurgence in like the interest in indigenous cultures, like I've seen a lot of people learn languages or trying to hone back into those aspects of indigenous people's lives, do you think that is one of the key steps to healing these processes? Do you think it's helpful? Do you think it's kind of a substitution for like we don't physically have this land anymore, but we have our culture and our tribes and us as indigenous people holding us together? Like how do you feel about that?
Yeah, the land is still here. We just exist in this kind of strange relationship between Marquette and Kitche-Namibane-Zebing at the same time. As I walk around here, it's Kitche-Namibane-Zebing to me. And my ancestral memories go way back. Some folks have only known this as Marquette. And what does that go back to? 1868, is it? Is it 1868?
49.
49, okay. A few more years then. But what does that identity hold? What does that identity mean for Native people versus non-Native people? A lot of the non-Native identity, if we look around Marquette, there's an icon sticking out into Lake Superior there. That's kind of the center of what we think of as Marquette. People think of that as the icon and the one down by Preston Island. The ORDOC. So what does that mean? Is non-native culture centered in mining? Is native culture centered in mining? I don't think so. To get to the center, the jit chug of Indian identity in this same community, we have to look to our language. When we think about, well, what does jit chug mean? How do we operationalize that within a cultural, linguistic context? Well, we do know that Odet, our heart, that's where our spirit resides. That is our jit chug, our center as human beings. Odet is part of Ishk Godet, which is our fires. Our fires. We had a central fire in our homes, the home fire. Odenam, the name of our villages, the general name for a village. Odenam, heart. The heart is in there. So when we recenter ourselves, we find these maps to our identity through our language. I think that is a healing process. We have to embrace our language. It's the only way we're able to find meaning that predates colonization. That and the other art forms that we have, our stories, right? But those things have to come from this pre-colonial context. That's why the Decolonizing Diet Project was so instrumental in our lives, because it was healing. It was having us eat the foods our ancestors ate from here. The most healthy you can eat anywhere in the world is local and indigenous. It's been there thousands of years, and you don't have to import it from 10,000 miles away. It makes sense.
Marty, can you envision a return to land locally that would also include those of us that are living here now that aren't indigenous?
Yes. Yeah.
And how do you see that kind of intertwining?
So decolonizing. When we were on the Decolonizing Diet Project, we didn't say, okay, every restaurant in Marquette has to now get out of Marquette, right? We just simply made a decision that we were going to eat this way. And we also encouraged the local businesses to help us. Marquette Food Co-op started labeling stuff in there DDP eligible. How nice!
Yeah.
It sure made it nice for us. Phil's Fish House started smoking fish using DDP ingredients. That was very nice. We can make these decisions to live better together, right? And I always say that decolonizing doesn't mean all non-natives go home. I am mixed ancestry. I can't split myself. I can't send half of myself over to Ireland. But I am going to go visit Ireland one of these days. One of these days. But I also like some things that came from this era. Colonization sucks, but there were some cool things that came with it. Pink Floyd is my favorite band. They're from Britain. All right? A world without Pink Floyd is not a world I want to live in.
All right, let's. Oh, you got another question?
I read somewhere that to know another language is to have another soul. And I think that's maybe part of what you're saying and part of what my glasses are steaming up. I would encourage anyone, non-native or native, to take an Anishinaabe course at Northern, because through the language, like Marty said, it helps us non-native people grasp a whole different way of being and thinking, and it's a beautiful experience.
Yeah, the history of human interactions with this place, with Mother Earth in this place where we all live, which we're going through an identity crisis, all of us, because we've forgotten these things. That history is located in that language. It goes back thousands of years. It knows more about here than any of us using a contemporary sense of language and identity. So if we truly want to know this place there's a way. Miigwech, thank you all.
Thank you all for coming. Next Monday, do not forget, 6 o'clock, Marty's going to be there with his band. 7 o'clock, Joy Harjo will be speaking to us virtually, but and I would encourage you, if you want to have a question posed to Joy Harjo, you can contact me, email me. I'm going to be collecting as many questions as I can and get through as many of those as I can with Joy in the time that I have after her presentation. So please contact me if you have anything like that. There are evaluation forms back there. That really helps us bring more programs like this to the area. So if you can fill out those evaluation forms as you're leaving, that would be really, really helpful so we can get more Big Read grants like this. Okay? So thank you all, and hopefully we'll see you on Monday night. It is at the library.
I'm just going to sing a song for you guys. You don't have to sit. I'm just going to sing a song for you as you leave. This is a song that comes, it's a Panema song, and it's an old song for Anishinaabe people, and it's a song that we would sing as people would be heading out, to go off to war, go off to hunt or whatever. So it was a traveling song. I'm just going to sing for you. Away, 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 Good to see you.
I was gonna say, they do a great job of recording, and Marty Atkins has been putting everything on. So I was just watching Amy's from Monday. I watched later, so if there was this series.
Oh, I'll keep that.
Yeah, and so like I was Professor Hamilton on Monday. Nice to see you.
Ever since
Very good to see you. Sorry.
You went down to the library.
You probably have like story time and something else going on. They have like
Kind of figured you're responsible. Take care. Come on. Well, that was fun.
great. Then I took off, ate dinner, came back.
Oh.
And it's neat to see everything transformed because when I left here, it was almost there were 20 kids running around, loud, you know, just like an atmosphere, and then I'm back.
Thank you.
Sometimes it's nice to have to. I love it. Hello there.
He's so much just like 1 hour. Each one of like each 10 minutes could be some
Oh, yeah. Great to see you. Thank you. Well, sure. No problem. Yeah, that's fun. It's a very dirty Native Studies sort of way.
I made me want to take one of your classes.
Oh, please do. It'd be great.
He's a little. Oh, did you? Good to see you. This summer?
Yeah, so sous chef.
How did she recently did just this summer? Gene Feather is taking one country now. Like, he must be really good for the next one. He's working with the store that we I don't know which professor in the
He's sous chef.
and it was
Which is the open name for that area on Mississippi, where the restaurant is.
yeah, it's gonna be
It's Christmas or
like cornmeal and we have like
Yes.
yeah, and it is we didn't do very well the first time.
You know, it's kind of funny.
We have the cookbook for sale.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You have the cookbook, okay, and so on. And there are some local food producers. One of the ones is Guadalupe Hill Farms.
She's by church.
What
They're
is it?
about 80%.
Yes,
They're
but
main product,
they're
sugar products.
Oh, actually, I'm
We
going to
also,
consider
my
this.
wife and I, we're gonna be producing.
That's perfect.
She will do the presentation, and then we'll go into questions. So it's like,
Something that we're getting that up and running, but it's the small startups, you know, for the most part, nothing that could really be, although some
yeah, that now is going to be
now
straight
moving that way.
like,
Right.
it's going to be exciting. I really like, but, you know, in the exact, you know, it's really cool, but really,
Vegetables and stuff. But what they're doing for is to feed their tribe. So
yeah, I've got this.
I'm not condemning.
Well, now I just have to make sure I don't like reptile or by mistake or something. That would be awful. I've also got Natasha Trekaways in my phone too, and I'm never either like eliminate those ever. I've got 2 U.S. court lawyers.
But I still like, you know, Chinese.
Yeah, it is.
You know.
You know, I have a friend in Pennsylvania who is but they're reading it. It's just oh my God.
First time I've ever presented this one.
It was really good. I mean, it was.
For me, or thank you.
Yeah, last year we did amazing.
It's all, you know, but it's knowledge, which is,
Yeah.
and there's so much.
A lot to cram into.
It is a lot.
Thank you.
Well, I guess we didn't leave a lot of extra time for questions and answers.
Yeah.
He's not. Because they put the last name on.